First thing I want to do is, okay, we finished the study. I got, 3,800 completed questionnaires. I'm cleaning the data for less reliable questionnaires. What do you know about this first table? So this is a question from my questionnaire for the survey. I'm trying to come up with an estimate of how people are responding to a difficult labor market and how much is entrepreneurship going to help create employment opportunities. So there's two things. One is looking at the process of how people become entrepreneurs. The other is the more complex, the more assumption-based of what is the proportion of expected entrepreneurs. And then there's the dynamism part, as I'll show you how unique the classificatory system became. So one of the questions was, how important is it to become an entrepreneur? How many people did I qualify to report this information? Can you tell that from this slide? Yeah. Okay, so we've dropped down from about 3,700 that completed the questionnaire. And remember, there's case-wise versus list-wise. I could look at maybe 3,300 that answered this question, but 400 didn't finish. So I've deleted those. Even though they answered this question, I've got concerns about the reliability of that data, and I got enough people that I can drop them. So how many of them are males and how many of them are females? Okay, so I got an oversample of women, but I don't care. The more data I have about information that's not publicly available, that's great, because what am I going to do with that data? What does that say right there? Reweighted. So what did I do? I took the known population of Saudi students that have attended college and looked at the distribution by gender based on Ministry of Education statistics. And at that time period, approximately 52.3% were women. So I took my 67% and I reduced it to 53. That's a basic reweight. So now I'm looking at this as a more representative sample, and I've adjusted it to the known population estimates of the population as a whole. Now, my research hypotheses were a couple. One of them was, well, men are more likely to become entrepreneurs than women. Why would that assumption be? So the research literature said Saudi men are more likely to be entrepreneurs than Saudi women. Restrictions like, what does that mean?
I mean, more male would be able to in terms of restriction to working and social-cultural.
Okay, but even more than that, what's just a basic reason? What age do women get married? Mother's generation, 18, 19 years old. By the time 20s, children, domestic responsibilities, males are supporting a family, so we expect more men to be entrepreneurs than women, right? That was the research hypothesis. So I go out and I test it, because if social change is occurring, if it's not occurring, we should see a big difference between the expectations by gender of who's going to become an entrepreneur. What do we find at this basic level? Very important. This is the category I'm really interested in. Is there a big difference between men and women? No, that's a significant finding. The probability that this distribution occurred by chance, what does that mean? 1 out of 1,000. So the probability that this distribution occurred by chance is 1 in 1,000. So I'm feeling I can go further in depth in this, because statistically it looks pretty reliable. We've done a pretty good job so far. Now I break it down to a second question. In the next 5 years, do you intend to start your own business? So I've gone from a general opinion to a question that's asking about actualizing that behavioral orientation of starting a business. So what what difference would this question, the answer to this question be if I said, in the next 10 years, do you expect to start a business versus the next 5 years? Would that make a difference in the answer? Yes, because maybe what? Why?
Because it shows 5 years difference. It shows that you are mentally prepared to do it as soon as you can, as soon as you graduate or whatever, rather than giving yourself 10 years. Maybe you change your mind. Maybe.
Okay. How old are these people?
19 to 29.
Okay. 10 years for a 20-year-old is an eternity, right? 30 years old, I'm 20. I don't know what's going to happen in 10 years. But 5 years, I'm a junior, I'm a sophomore, 2 or 3 years after I graduate. That time horizon, I feel I'm comfortable about what I expect to be doing. So 5 years is digestible. 10 years, everybody could have said, yeah, maybe. I'm not going to feel really good about that data. It's not reliable to me. So I chose 5 years. And what do we see? How many male respondents are there? Got 1,000. Probability of chance is low, so we feel good about that relationship. And so, what do we see? Yes, they expect to start a business. Of those people that it's very important, we see a very strong orientation. Those people say it's important to become, being an entrepreneur is important to them, and actually actualizing that interest is exactly what we would expect it to be. So let's look at these two categories when we compare to females. Yeah?
I wonder about the question was in the next 5 years, you intend to start your own business. This is one question. What is the rest of this sentence here?
These are the two questions that are cross-tabulated. The first question is,
To own your business one?
the first question is, how important is it to be an entrepreneur?
Yeah, no.
See, that question, oh, shoot. It's the cross-tabulation of, do you plan to start a business in 5 years, and how important is it to become an entrepreneur? Okay, so this is what we call going from univariate descriptive statistics of one question and the results. This is when you're looking at the two variables together. So this is saying, if you, in the next 5 years, do you expect to start a business, and what are your attitudes to how important it is to become an entrepreneur? So of course, our expectation is the greater the importance to you of becoming an entrepreneur, the greater the likelihood is that you expect to start a business. And you'll see how important this is in a moment. So this is the category, I'm going to start a business in 5 years. These are the categories, it's very important, it's moderately important. This is the category maybe, these are the no's. That's the males. To create a multi-dimensional measure, remember I used the example of job satisfaction, and we could come up with 5 or 6 different components that we would have a high degree of imprecision if we use simply your satisfaction with income to summarize your job satisfaction. What I've done here is I've taken these two key variables, how important is it to become an entrepreneur, and do you expect to start a business in 5 years, to create a new variable called commitment to entrepreneurship. And I just wanted to show this to you for those who are interested in, like to do this little simple programming. This is how we did it in SPSS in the PDF file. Okay, so this is a way of creating from multiple measures, multiple questions, one new variable. This is the intensity of commitment to entrepreneurship. So those people that have a very, it's very important to become an entrepreneur, and in the next 5 years they're going to start a business, they get scored very high. It's important to become an entrepreneur. Moderately important, yes. So we created these categories based on the responses, the joint responses to those two categories, to come up with this new variable. Again, just to compare from before, this is the difference by gender. We see at the top category 66, 37. My expectation is the commitment's going to be a little lower. Why? Because of the uncertainty of, in many cases, of getting married and having children. We would expect that commitment to entrepreneurship would be a little bit lower among this group. So now here's the new variable. This is something that became very intriguing to me. If I'm looking at the relationship between the entrepreneurial ecosystem in Saudi Arabia and its labor market, we tend to have a general category of entrepreneurs. Instead, what we're seeing here is a much more dynamic relationship between the labor market and the entrepreneurial ecosystem. And it raised one of the questions, research hypotheses on entrepreneurship. If the economy is expanding, what is the expectation of the growth of entrepreneurship? Are there more entrepreneurs when the economy is expanding, or are there less? Conversely, when the economy is slowing down, do we expect more entrepreneurs or fewer entrepreneurs? What's our research hypothesis? Saudi economy is growing, therefore we're testing what in terms of the directionality of growth of entrepreneurship?
It will also increase
because
the opportunities are more and the economy is more vibrant. People tend to be more.
See, the research literature would actually say the opposite. The research literature would say there's more job opportunities, so people are not going to take the risk of putting their personal fortunes into a business when they can have a successful career. Conversely, if the economy isn't growing, we see the rise of necessity entrepreneurs. There's no jobs, and they start a business. That's just a research hypothesis, and there are issues that when the economy is growing, there's more opportunities for business people. So that was one research hypothesis, and in fact, that's not what I found. In fact, what I find is that as the economy is growing, particularly for women, and you'll see this in one of the questions, that this is an opportunity to get a job and save money and start a business. So if the economy is slowing down, there's fewer jobs to save money to start a business. So there's some interesting dynamics that when you only study entrepreneurship or you only study labor markets, what I did was look at them together to see how dynamic that process is. So what you see here is I came up with a new classificatory scheme of, and this is to me really important, the high intensity are the potential Elon Musks. How important is it for the government to support a potential Elon Musk that's an innovative disruptor that could transform or establish new industries, versus the high intensity or the kind of traditional business people. They're not big innovators, but they're going to do the job and make money and be successful. But the other category becomes really interesting, the reluctant entrepreneurs and the ambivalent entrepreneurs. And you'll see this in a moment in the question. In other words, people that can't find a job, how committed are they to establishing a small business? And what does that mean to the entrepreneurial ecosystem? What does that mean in terms of supporting nascent or startup businesses if you don't know whether they're committed or not? So, remember that question? I said I asked it in two separate ways. Here's the first version of it. I want to become an entrepreneur because it's hard to find a good job. Makes sense, right? That's going to test the question about degree of commitment. And for men, what do you see? About a third of them are saying they're really committed, but it's because they can't find a good job. Conversely, you see the disagree, strongly disagree, which is nearly 50%, that says, no, the highly committed entrepreneurs, it doesn't matter whether they can find a job or not, they're going to become entrepreneurs. That's what we would expect in this category. We see it lesser in the second level of intensity. But notice what happens here when we get down to these categories. Much less, the commitment is wavering. And let's look at it in comparison to females. Notice how much higher it is for committed entrepreneurs among women. They're saying that even though they're committed to entrepreneurship, it's because they can't find a good job. That's a reflection of discrimination in the labor market. And I got 5 more minutes. Okay, so now we can compare by gender that there's something different in terms of the experience of women in the labor market and the commitment of people to entrepreneurship versus careers and jobs. What about the attitude and motivation for starting a business? One thing now I ask is, why do you want to start a business? It's for money. Doesn't everybody start a business for money? Well, no, we find out that's not necessarily the case. Guys say we're doing it for money because we got to save money to start a business, we got to support a family, got to pay a dowry. So men are much more likely to say their motivation for starting a business is money. Is that the same for women? No. We see here women are, especially the most committed entrepreneurs, are much less likely to say they're doing it for the money. So now we're starting to see divergent orientations, and what does that mean, especially in the types of businesses, which is kind of the next stage of the research to follow. Then we ask, what other reasons? Empowerment, freedom. This is a question about female entrepreneurs. And we see that almost 2/3 of the men that are highly motivated and committed to entrepreneurship, they believe that women have greater freedom and power. That's why they want to become entrepreneurs. But notice how much bigger it is, higher it is for the ladies. They think it's far more important to become entrepreneurs for freedom and empowerment. So now we have an understanding that this new generation has different motivations and ultimately will start different kinds of businesses. This is the one that's most striking to me. This is a question that says, your female spouse or partner, what is the expectations of getting a job? And notice that for men, they expect that their female partner is much less likely to get a job. But for women, look at that, 95% of about 2,000 women say that they expect to get a job. Is that realistic? How does that compare to the West? We don't have anywhere near that level of expectation in the West. Why? How do we explain that? How do people start a business? Well, here's where we start to get some really important nuances. Women are twice as likely to say that they're going to start a business at home. Most people, almost 50% of people, say they're going to start it from savings. 3/4 of women say they're going to start it at home and or from their savings. And now we can start teasing the labor market. A lot of women are going to start a small business from the savings that they have, and that job's going to turn over much faster to get into entrepreneurship. The data leads us to some interesting questions. When I compare people that are 23 or younger about how they're going to get money to start a business, young people say they're going to save, older people say they're going to go to a bank. Why is that? And how do you interpret that? If I'm giving this presentation to the ministry, I've got to be able to explain what's going on. And the reality of it is young people are naive, they haven't had a realistic job experience, and when you do a mixed method and do an in-depth case study with some people, and they'll say, I thought I was going to save when I was young, I didn't, now I got to go to the bank. Well, this has important data implications because if you look at the average, you can say that the demand for bank loans and government loans isn't that high on average. But then if you look at people when they're actually starting a job and they say, I didn't save any money, I really can't move forward without a bank loan. So the data, the understanding of your data is crucially important here. So just to conclude then, I went from being deductive to inductive. And my colleague was a Saudi, been married, paid a dowry. I said, I think that we're missing something here. somewhere the data isn't fitting as strongly as it should be, and I asked the question, I'm looking at the United States with student loans that are too high that are inhibiting entrepreneurship. People graduating with too much debt, they can't borrow money to start a business. It's reducing the amount of entrepreneurs. Is that something that could be comparable in Saudi Arabia in terms of a marriage dowry obligation? So we asked the question, would you start your business before or after marriage? And what do we find? Not a big difference, but that's of everybody. Then we asked the question of based on motivations. Remember, we took this composite measure and we look at the most committed entrepreneurs. And what do we see among men? It rises. The most committed men say that to their businesses that they want to start it before marriage. So that shouldn't surprise us how much the gap falls between the lower level categories. We compare that to women, and surprisingly, it's not that much different for the most committed female entrepreneurs. They are saying that they want to get married after they start their business. Then we ask the question of, does a marriage dowry delay your marriage? Saving for marriage dowry. And this is only of those people that say they plan to start a business in 5 years. We compare it by gender, and this is the real surprise. 80% of men say that the marriage dowry will delay their marriage, but 69% of the women say the same thing. Yet the narrative comments in our survey for open-ended questions say, the ladies will go, well, we don't save the dowry, so it doesn't affect us at all. But the data says it does, that there is a realization that men are delaying marriage and it's affecting the women. The number of men in the marriage pool is declining and women are having to wait. And that raises the question of causality. So as we look at levels of commitment, we actually see much less of a difference than we expected. 75% and 86% of men that are highly committed say that a marriage dowry delays their marriage. 62 and 73% of women, much less than we expected. So then to conclude, the real question is one of causality. Are women entrepreneurs increasing because men are not getting married? Are women entrepreneurs increasing because there's greater opportunities? Are women entrepreneurs through guardian restrictions? Many fathers won't let them work in a mixed environment, and therefore entrepreneurship is a compromise because they're not getting married or they're going to go to graduate school. So what do? We look at the retrospective opportunity of this survey and ask, what did your parents do? What did you do? And so what do we see here? The average age of marriage of our generation of 19 to 29-year-olds of mothers was about 19 to 20. And fathers was 24 to 25. Ladies say they expect to get married about 5 years later. Is that a big difference? It's an enormous difference demographically. And keep in mind, 5 years is expected. We know it's going to be longer than that. So what's going to happen over that 5-year period of time? What we're seeing is the rise of opportunities to fill that period with entrepreneurship. And then the question becomes, how different are the jobs that are going to be created from the businesses between men and women? So this is the challenge that I give you, that without any kind of data, this gives me the opportunity to raise questions about delayed household formation, about what is going to happen to the economy with lower birth rates. What happens to the economy instead of paying for diapers at 24? What are people going to do with their discretionary income? It means the demand for a service and leisure economy is going to organically grow because of this demographic transition. The implications are quite profound as we forecast them in the future. All of this based on, hopefully, challenges to some of the assumptions and conclusions of research like this that will lead to the collection of more data that doesn't exist currently today. So I hope you can see how one Westerner came in to answer some questions with no data available, tried to utilize our scientific research approaches and methodology, collected the data, and offer this as an example for you to pursue your research agenda and interests, and don't let yourself be held hostage to the availability or lack of data that's available. So I hope this helps inspire you, or at least give you a direction to move forward with your research in the future. So if you have any questions, I'll be happy to answer them. Thank you.